So talk about working with James Gregory.
Jimmy Gregory had a career. He was the most established performer of all of us, movie-wise. Jimmy Gregory played all those senators and judges all those years. Never did a comedy. We didn't think of Jimmy Gregory as a comedian, as funny. Danny knew him, and Danny created that character, and Jimmy's the one who put it together. Jimmy, I'm sure, picked the bow tie and all the little things that he did. And Jimmy was, he was, I think, as available. He was not contracted to be available, so they could only use him when he was available. And every so often, in would come Spectre. Barney's relationship with him was, again, suffering him gladly to an extent, but with an enormous amount of appreciation for someone who had spent a life doing a job and doing it relatively well. So he loved it when the Inspector came in, and he hated when the Inspector came in, Jimmy personally, as I said, did all his work himself. He came in word perfect, and with every piece of business ready to go in every place. You didn't fool with Jimmy. Nobody directed him. This is the way he worked. We, on the other hand, because we were not, first of all, we didn't have the technique and the years of experience that Jimmy had. We were all, most of us had stage experience, so when we approach a scene, we would talk about it. This is, like actors sometimes do, if you have the time. It's hard to do if you're doing a movie, unless you have a couple of weeks of rehearsal. But under the circumstances, they would bring a scene down, and we would start from scratch, and the cameras were ready to shoot. So we would talk about it, input. Listen, if I do this, would this elicit this response from you? Maybe we can, and so we talked about the characters from the inside out, of course. Jimmy was very, what shall I say? He didn't have much patience for that. He certainly didn't have any patience for those who needed to prepare as actors. He was he knew his craft. Boy, he knew it well. And he didn't suffer anybody who had to find his character. So it was always that relationship. When Jimmy came in, we did his scene. Didn't worry, there was no talk. He knew exactly what he was going to do. This went on for a couple of years. And then Jimmy got his own show. Now, again, every time we would start to talk about motivation, and Jimmy, the eyes would go up into his head, and he would go have a cigarette or something. Jimmy was off the show for a while. He got his own show. It was a show, I think, called Detective School or something, in which somebody came up with the idea that he was the teacher, and they hired 5 stand-up comics or 10 stand-up, however, 6 people, and he was going to teach them how to be detectives. They were all comics. Comics are not always that disciplined in terms of playing a scene. They always want to do bits. They always, as I say, they lack of discipline. Let's leave it at that. One night, it was, 2:30 in the morning, again on a Thursday. We were still shooting. This is after Jimmy was gone. When Jimmy came in to visit, I don't know if he had a few drinks, but hey, Jim, we all, and he just looked at us. He says, I just wanted to watch some actors work. I guess he, having maybe taken it for granted, he all of a sudden found out it's not to be taken for granted. There's work done, and all of a sudden he just couldn't wait to get back to Barney. I don't know what, I don't think a show ever, I don't know if it aired even. He shot a few of them, I don't know. I ended up seeing Jimmy, some years later, after he retired, he had a stroke. He lived in Sedona, Arizona, and I was driving through, and we called and got to see him a few years before he died. He's gone quite a while now. But thing about Jimmy was an entire career, I don't think he had a funny line. And all of a sudden, as far as I'm concerned, the cherry on the top of a career where he created this wonderful, hysterical character, describing Brownie in the retirement home with the drooling, And that was all Jim. That was all his imagination. Because I think Danny just created the character, or somebody did, and he just took it and ran with it.
Talk about Barbara Barry.
Barbara was an old friend from New York. I had worked for Barbara's husband. Barbara was married to Sheldon Harnick's brother. And I had worked for both brothers. I knew both of them, Jay Harnick. And they lived across the street from me in New York. We were, so I knew them, as neighbors, and again, Barbara was the second casting. She was my second wife. She was cast in the second pilot. And as it went on, it became more apparent that the precinct was where the play was going to take place. So she took to visiting the precinct and coming down to, you forgot this, or so, just to get her in the show. They stopped writing scenes at home. The first year was a short year. We were a mid-season pickup. So she came back for the second year, but she was very dubious about it. They tried to give her a career. She became a social worker, if I remember correctly, and so now she had somebody was arrested. She was the social worker. And of course there was the conflict of interest. After about, I think, 6 or 8 weeks, she finally turned to Dan. He said, "You're working too hard to keep me in this. Come on, let me go." And she left the show. She may have done one guest shot after that, but it just was not. The show grew away from her character, unfortunately, because she's a brilliant actress. She's a wonderful actress.
Do you remember controversy over the characters separating on the show? There was a storyline where
we separated.
Yeah,
one point?
and apparently the audience
didn't like that.
Yeah, but
I'm sure they did that to explain her absence, and to humanize Barney. Nobody can be that perfect a human being, to humanize Barney, to give him. Because I know there was a scene where I don't remember who it was, hits on me, and you can, he's now separated, and the conflict building up, which is what you want to see, is the conflict. You don't want to see the resolution. You want to see the conflict. But that was just an attempt to explain why the character disappeared. But it was a function of the show. The show obviously lived and died in that precinct room. And the more times they could just stay in the precinct room, the more unique the show was in character. We very rarely left it, very rarely.
You've talked about the group as a whole a little bit, but what do you think made that ensemble so successful?
They were good actors. They were not hired as comedians. They were actors. There's a tendency since to utilize stand-up comics as, and I'm not saying it's not a misbegotten idea. Ray Romano did pretty good with it, and Tim, what's his name, Tim Allen. You know, they were stand-up comics who really had wonderful shows. So I'm not Seinfeld. It's not necessarily so, but this was a show that was not about. We were not the comedy. The comedy were the people who came in. We were the ones who were reacting to the comedy. So they were good actors who knew how to play a scene and didn't worry about whether they had the punchline or somebody else did. I think that was and I must tell you, it took me a few episodes to realize that we were not supposed to be funny, or we eventually got to realize the quality of the writing and that we had the opportunity just to play it and let the comedy come from the writing. And I think that's eventually, again, I suspect at least one of the greatest ensemble casts ever assembled. I mean, there have been, Seinfeld and Friends and MASH, and there's been plenty. But for a gang comedy, this was a gang comedy. Hard to beat it.
Talk a little bit about the set and working in that one location all the time.
Well, we didn't think about it. The scene took place in that location. That's where you played. It didn't disturb us because it was a scene at the desk. The scene became the end result. Didn't worry about the location. There were sometimes we had to go elsewhere. It became a little uncomfortable sometimes. I went to jail in one scene, and I remember it was supposed to be uncomfortable, so it was uncomfortable. But very rarely did they leave that. It was too good a palette to change. There was no reason to.
How did you make guest actors feel comfortable when they came in?
Well, first of all, you had to explain to them. They were not used to the format that we used. They were used to coming up, learning their parts, being staged, doing the shows in front of a live audience. And, there were some fine actors, I can't think of his name, who pulled out. Ned Beatty pulled out of a show because he didn't see a full script. And I sat next to him, and I said, Ned, I guarantee you it's going to be as good as the first act that you got. He said, I'm afraid I'm not going to do it, and he pulled out, and somebody else came in and had to play that part. A lot of actors were frightened by the fact that we start to shoot a picture and you don't know how your character is going to end. That's very frightening. So a lot of what I did was explaining. Listen, I know it sounds crazy, but you got to have faith. You can sit down and talk with Dan. He'll tell you exactly where the character's going, so you can do it yourself. Even if you don't have the exact words, that's what's going to happen. And to try to make them feel at home, don't worry about it. And also, get a good night's sleep, because I guarantee you're going to be here till 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a company town gag. It was a joke around this town. Barney Miller, what are they doing at 4 o'clock in the morning? They're still shooting. And let me tell you something. That's expensive. That's what they call golden time. Not so much for us, but for the cameramen and everybody. That's very expensive. But Danny never looked at the bottom line. It was always, is the scene going to, how do we make that scene work best in that show? And he went and did it. It was tough on a lot of actors who weren't prepared for the. It's exhausting, but you need an immense amount of concentration because you shot the first scene yesterday, and your first line yesterday, and today is your second line, to keep the concentration of the character through. It was tough on a lot of actors, but a lot of them thrived in it. There was one actor who was in 7 different Barney Millers as 7 different people, and loved it every time. So, and Danny did that all the time. He liked the way you did the part. He'd write you in the next season as somebody else. We had the same. It was like a repertory company practically.
Did you have a favorite guest actor?
If I can, I'm terrible with names. That's I'm afraid to mention anybody. But we had, as I say, people who came back time and time again, and they were comfortable. They were ready to play another character for a week. Why not?
Do you have a favorite episode of the show?
I was asked that question. Well, I have to. A couple. One was, of course, the quintessential one, which was hash brownies. I thought that was just so amazing and wonderful. I'd have to pull the episode that I directed because that was the one one of the episodes I directed, and the scene between that particular scene, which was a banal conversation between two people about how you're doing and what's your husband doing and how do the kids and what. And when I gave them the backstory of 2 high school kids who almost did it, but not quite, and the imaginings that maybe it'll happen today, I can get a few hours off, and I don't have to be home to my husband until, and what each one is thinking while they're saying these banal things, and how subtext just created this hysterical scene, which was not to begin with. It was staged simply, just 2 people sitting in chairs opposite each other, over the shoulder, single. And got funnier and funnier each time they did it. And now, I'm talking about the cameramen, who've been watching the same scene 6 times. But by the 6th time, it was so fraught with sexual tension that every line they said became hysterical. I would say one of my favorites, certainly. Just the doing of it was just a joy.
As a New Yorker, how do you think the show represented New York?
I tried to get Danny to shoot it in New York. I lived in New York. I was living in a hotel when I came to California to do Barney Miller. I said, Danny, why don't we do this in New York? There's all these New York actors. You got the locations. You got anything you want. Danny was a New Yorker too. He grew up about 10 blocks from where I grew up, but he hated it. He says, I hate New York. I don't want to live there. And that was it. He didn't want to live there. Wherever he wanted to shoot it, that's where we were going to shoot it.
Do you think it depicted New York accurately?
I don't know if there's such a thing as depicting New York accurately. I mean, New York is in the eye of the beholder. I fought to go back to New York because I thought, I was the quintessential New York actor who came here and wouldn't buy a 6-pack because I might not finish it before I have to go back to New York, now that I live here, you can't play golf in New York, you know. So it's all in the eye of the beholder. My wife had an interesting take on the difference. In those days, we always thought New York was the center of activity. It was buzzing. Things happened, and L.A. was laid back. And after living here for some amount of time, she said, it's true to an extent. But the reason is it takes so much energy to exist in New York, just to get from place to place and do what you have to do. Here, you take your time. You get in your car, you park your car, you go and do what you have to do. New York, you got to walk 3 blocks to the supermarket. You got to carry them back. You don't have a car to put them in. That's why New York is so buzzing with excitement, because it takes that kind of energy just to exist. And to some extent, I think she was right. I think, maybe I don't know, I'm not as comfortable in New York as I used to be.
Why did the show finally come to an end?
It was never canceled. It was never canceled. The next to last season, Danny was going to close it. Sitcoms are by definition self-destructive. That is, they feed on themselves. You get, the minute you have we had what? Let's say 5 writing sources. A team, a writer, another team. 5, 6 writing sources, something like that. And they're, numbered 1 through 6. Well, the minute you have a show that's a hit, the number 2 team is now every network. Their agent is at every network. He's got an idea. He's the number 2 team on Barney Miller. Listen to this idea, and so you're always losing your number 2 team every year, and maybe 3 team. Well, it's 4, 5, and 6 move up, and you get 2 new guys. And that happens every year. It feeds on itself. And the essence of Barney Miller was the script. Danny eventually had a heart attack, and he couldn't spend the energy to oversee it. He didn't have his hands on anymore, that closely as he did in the beginning, when every word went through Danny to make sure that it was perfect. And so they, in the next to last year, he thought he wanted to close the show because he was having trouble finding writing sources. For some reason, I forget, some contractual reason, he couldn't. He had to go the next year. And he came to us at the beginning of the year and said, gentlemen, I am going to take submissions for Barney Miller from anybody. For the next 2 months, I'm just going to read scripts from college kids, from amateurs, anybody who wants to send me a script, I'll read it. If I can find a writing force that can execute this show, we'll go on. If not, no. He said, again, the only reason to do this show is to do it right. If we have to settle, I don't want to do it. We're rich enough now. We'll all go on to our future careers. We don't have to do less than what we expect Barney to be. And he disappeared, and 2 months later came back and said, gentlemen, we're closing at the end of the year. There's no way. Of course, every submission was a copy of what we had done. There was nothing new, nothing vital. It would be just copies. It was a Yamana coffee joke, or a run for Dietrich, or they were all the same, recycled. That's what everybody had. And he said, why? It was good the first time. Leave it alone. And Danny closed the show. He said, "That's it. We're not doing it anymore." Never canceled.
And how did the series end? What was the storyline?
The storyline was that they were going to tear down it was such an old building, you know. They were going to tear it down and make a new one out of it. And because it was going to be torn down, a lot of people from the neighborhood who had been there came back as their characters to say goodbye and thank you. So there was, Fish came back, all these, some characters who had been there over the years. It was just a local store dealer, Lou Jacoby, I think, played him. Came back, store owner, just to say goodbye. So it was really a goodbye show.
What do you?
And I have the picture on my wall of me closing the door for the last time. I'm carrying my whatever I took in my arms and look around at the empty room and just close the door. That was the end of the show.
What do you think the show's legacy is?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you one specific legacy it did. Danny invented the concept of multiple editing by split screen. And he did it physically. When we came in, I think it was the second year, there was no more audience, so behind the cameras were 4 television monitors. And he sat facing the 4 television monitors, or whoever was directing it. And he would tell the cameras where to go by looking at what they did. And they were recorded in split screen for editing purposes. Nowadays, they do that electronically. Director sits in front of the monitors and watching what every camera's doing, or, you know. Danny invented that, but he did that with actual television sets that he piled one on top of another. He created that and that was all in the effort of not losing control of the show, because a cameraman who's supposed to get to a 2-shot he has to move. Maybe he was a quarter of a minute or a second late, so it was moving by the time you got. And when you got into the editing room, you had a moving shot all of a sudden, and you don't want it. You want that. You know, you'd never know unless you see them, and you have them, and that's why Danny would not. That's why he went to that whole system of how to shoot the show. So he had control of every shot. There were no bad shots. You may have seen some peculiar edits, and that would be for time purposes. Sometimes, you know, a show would come in 3 minutes long. You had to cut out, because he never stood with a stopwatch. He just played the scene. And eventually, there may have been some funny cuts, maybe, but he always had control of it. So it was always you see them today, and they're just solid. You know, you couldn't shoot them any better. As far as content, I'm not as down on sitcoms as most people are. Most people say, "Oh, I don't do it, man." You know, and baloney. There are some fine sitcoms. You could watch Seinfeld and Friends and a whole bunch of, you know, that have been done since, and even the ones today. They're well done. They're not. But I think Danny was one of the pioneers. I think the pioneer work of doing a sitcom where that was not over the top. That was realistic. That was real. That's what Joe Wambaugh said. The most realistic cop show. Not only the best, the most realistic, because that's what cops do. They do paperwork. They have to make reports. You know, it's grunt work. It's not the fancy, firing of weapons. And I think may have been certainly a landmark show like that. That's hard to do that way. It's hard to do. It's easier to be, silly and funny and, nowadays with the obligatory gay character doing gay jokes, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to find a situation. And you know where they got their storylines? They would read the newspapers. Every day they'd read the newspaper. Oh, here's a story about a woman in Seattle who had her husband arrested for rape. And they wrote a whole story about that. Right out of reality. I would imagine that should be honored time will honor that. Yeah. In terms of what followed. Yeah.
Where do you think the character Barney Miller would be today?
They had Danny always wanted to do a movie. Later on, movie I forgot what I don't. He once outlined the story. He never got around to doing it. Whole bunch of reasons. The question was whether Barney would ever make an inspector. That was always. Is he going to make inspector? I suspect he did eventually, although he was not a very good politician when it came to the politics of any business, So, but I would imagine he eventually made inspector somewhere, and maybe ended up retiring and taking a job as a police chief in Florida somewhere, running a police department in a small town or something. That would be my expectation.
So let's talk about some projects you did after Barney Miller.
Say it again. Oh, yeah.
After Barney.
Whoa, well, it was tough after Barney.
In what way?
Just the quality of the work that we did is rare. It's so rare, and they never took the time. The time is always it's particularly in television, I don't have to tell you. There's always somebody watching the clock. You can't, some studios have limitations on amount of takes, things like that, And you can understand it. It's a business. But as an actor, it's hard to compare it. I did 3 shows after that, 2 hours and a sitcom. And time was always we always kind of had to, there was a little bit of settling in everything we did ever since. And we never had that guy say, no, the reason for being here is that it has to be perfect. Stay until you get it right. And it was evident in everything after that. Always felt a certain amount of. Now, I'm not saying when I, as an actor, appeared on somebody else's show, that's a different thing. You come in, you do your part as you see it in the context of what you think the show's style is and and you execute your role. And that was true before Barney or after Barney. But when I settled down to do a series with, there was never that investigation of moments, and we just never had the time for it.
Well, let's talk about a few specific things. After Barney, it's our understanding that you were offered a role on St. Elsewhere?
Yes, right after Barney. I think it was the same year it could have been. I don't remember the exact. And just as a personal career, I said, should I go right back into another series? What's happening on Broadway? I had actually had discussions about doing a Broadway musical. I thought maybe it'd be better if I went back and resuscitated the musical aspect of my career. So we turned it down. I never read a script. I don't, I just said, I really don't think I should do a TV series right away. We'll do one next year, or, little did I know.
Do you know which role you were up for?
One of the doctors. Honestly, I never met with them. I was just spoken, from my agents who came to me and my managers who just said, we have this offer to do another pilot. And I didn't even know what it was about. I didn't even go that far into it. I just said, let's not do a series right away. One also imagines a cinematic career. Maybe it was difficult in those days to go from TV to cinema. It's easier today. But I wanted to explore other possibilities. So personally, I just said, let's skip for the time being. Didn't work out all that well.
There's a lot more to talk about.
Oh yeah, I'm not complaining, but the cinematic part never came to be. I've done some movies, but if I have any regrets, it's that I never got to do the really classic picture with a great director. That's about the only thing I haven't done.
There's time.
It's still
plenty of time. A few things that you did while you were still on, Barney. You were on an episode, actually in one of the 2 pilots that were shot for The Love Boat.
Oh yes.
So what's your memory of that experience?
Again, when you don't have the time to solve what appears to an actor to be a major problem. I had a scene in a stateroom on the Love Boat, which was where I was seducing Karen Carpenter, basically. And we got into the scene, and I look at they had these portholes, and I see out the porthole is a railing. I said, excuse me, should I close the curtains when I'm going to? Oh, no, it looks better with the... I said, I'm going to try to seduce this lady. You think I would do it with the windows wide open? And obviously, it's not the side of the ship. There's a railing there. People are going to be walking by. I said, that's just the set. I said, it may be just the set, but I'm sitting here. This is a stateroom. Am I a pain in the ass for asking for that, do you think? That was my recollection. I think we actually put in a thing where they put curtains, and I very slyly closed the curtains while I was in the process of. Now, believe me, it wouldn't have affected the picture that much. But as an actor, you commit to a scene, you commit to a moment, you commit to that you're doing what the script calls for, that you're actually executing. Again, we are executive artists as actors. Somebody else tells us what to say, and somebody else tells us how to say it. But we try to do it creatively and realistically. You asked my memory? That's my memory.
That's great. You spent several seasons on Animals.
That was an interesting production, yes.
Why was it interesting?
Well, I only did the lead-ins and I was kind of the MC of the whole thing. So I did the whole season in like a week or 2. That we would go down to San Diego at the zoo or the animal park or wherever they, had and we would shoot the opening and the closing and the lines, either with an animal, with the animal, holding the animal, standing next to the animal, leaning down next to the animal. That started my knee troubles because it was a shot with a Galapagos turtle. And the cameraman kept saying, "Can you get closer? Can you get closer?" I kept kneeling, bending closer. And I was twisted in my knee, that's where I started swelling. So we did that for I don't know how many years, but I was clawed, scratched, bitten, kicked, peed on by I can't tell you how many different animals, but I was game for the whole operation. It was interesting. It was a lot of fun working with these animals.
In 1979, you did your own special. So let's talk about that. How did that come about?
Well, I had just come off a career of musical comedy in New York. I had a Tony. And this was a part of my career I wanted to... I was still doing concerts. I appeared in Vegas with an act. I have an act I still do to this day. I'm still doing it. Or not the same act, but I still perform as a musical performer. And I didn't want to let that go by. And we suggested, I said, we can do some... we got a deal with the network, agreed to it, and we did 2 pretty terrific specials, if you ever get a chance to see them. Really terrific specials. They were written by Ken and Mitzi Welch. Ken and Mitzi Welch did all those faux musicals with Carol Burnett. Remember those? She used to do these little funny, crazy musicals. They wrote all of them. It was directed by Joe Layton, a major theater director, and so they were very theatrical. 2 terrific, and I don't think anybody saw them. They did terrible in the ratings. It was the end of the specials time when actors did their, TV specials. And I guess it was running out of steam, and we just picked the wrong time to do them. But they're terrific if you ever get a chance to see them.
And were they based in part on your experiences on Broadway?
Well, one of them was basically autobiographical. The first one we did, my guest stars were Linda Lavin, Bonnie Franklin, and Skipper Damon. Catherine Damon, who was from Soap. Now, these were all actresses I knew from Broadway. We had all labored in the vineyards together. We had all busted our butts together to get here. And we were all adults. We were not kids anymore. Each one had made a career. But what we went through to get here was the subject of the... And so Linda did a terrific thing of singing in a nightclub where nobody pays attention to her. She's singing away and they're talking, and you hear what's going on in her mind while she's singing. It was hysterical. We did an industrial show. We used to do industrial shows, all of us. Bonnie Franklin was the tap dancer, dancing on the aluminum siding. And I was the spokesman, We did a commercial. Was it Bonnie and I? I can't remember. It was a Skipper and I did a commercial where we had one line, and they kept directing us on how to say the line over and over, and it got more and more ridiculous, The worst time we said it, we were kidding. That's the one they bought. We did a number where we were in the chorus. 2 other people were the leads. And we were in the chorus trying to get noticed in the chorus. Just original material written by Ken and Mitzi Welch for the... I remember the name of the song that these 2 people... It's About Time, it was called. And we were in the chorus trying to... There was a whole lyric about what the scene was about. I think it was a wedding scene. They were getting on a train to go to their honeymoon. And at the end of it, the four of us in front of the camera, about how we went through all of this. How do we feel about it? It's about time. And we did this wonderful finale about how, yeah, I'm here. I made it. I went through that. No more. It was, I thought it was brilliantly written. Brilliantly written. I don't think anybody saw it.
You were on a lot of other people's variety shows,
Oh yeah,
too.
yeah. Well, I'd love to do that. I'm a good variety performer. I have we're going out on tour this year with 30 different concerts, 30, 25, something like that, concerts in all across America. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite number that you did on anybody else's specials?
I'd have to think about that. I know I remember that. Yes, quite a few. I remember doing with Cher. We did a whole hospital musical, about a little mini musical, and we staged it, and then everybody had their coats on. They were going home, and I said, "Wait. Leave me a piano player. I got to do some rehearsing, please. I'm not as good as you people. I got to rehearse." And everybody, I kind of shamed them into coming back and continuing to rehearse so we could do it over and over again till we got it, got it under our belts and got it, the way we wanted it. I remember doing it. I did a number with, did a vaudeville number with Tom Jones. I can't remember what number we did. I did a number on the Hugh Carey show. We did a big musical number on the Hugh Carey show. A lot of fun stuff.
In 1980, in the 1980s, you were the host of FYI.
That was a fascinating. It was a public service thing by ABC. ABC. The latest information. What we've just, little bits of information that had just been found. We think this about something. No, that's not the way it is. It's really this way. And 1 minute spots. Also shot them the whole year in 1 week or something. But fascinating stuff. They tried to get it when the network let go of it or canceled it or stopped doing it. It was just a public service thing. It wasn't sponsored. But they tried to get, they had sponsors that would have made it a sponsored spot, drug company or Johnson & Johnson, something like that. The network wouldn't let go, and so it only ran a couple of years. But it was fascinating stuff. Not that I remember any of it, although there were a couple of books that they put together of the stuff that we said, or even new stuff that I kind of wrote the lead into. Yeah. Were
you involved with coming up with the ideas for the segments or anything?
No, but not by a long shot. I didn't know any new stuff. Again, we are executive artists. We execute other people's creativity.
Well, you executed this so well, you won 2 Daytime Emmy Awards for it. So what did that honor?
Excuse me. 3, but who's counting?
Oh, I apologize.
Okay, no, that's all right.
I apologize. I'm glad you corrected me. 3 Daytime Emmy Awards. So how did that?
Right, 3 Daytime Emmy.
How did that feel?
Listen, it's always nice to be honored. I'll tell you the truth, though. Barney, I think in 8 years, only won 3 Emmys. One was a director who mounted his own campaign. One was, I think, a writer who wrote a script, not even a staff writer, an outside writer. and won, I think, in the final year, got the Best Show award. That cast, I'm not worried about me. I'm okay, but that cast, which honestly, I would say among the certainly best resident companies I've ever worked with. Not a one of them ever won an Emmy, and I was a little put off by that. Even Jack Sue, in the year he died, you would think they would have honored him. So I got my Emmys. I'm thankful for them, and they were for everything but Barney Miller. But it's a lot of stuff you do is good work, but not necessarily Emmy-winning work. Jerry Orbach said to me, "They don't give you Emmys for saying, 'Where were you Thursday night?'"
In the 80s and 90s, you were in a slew of TV movies.
Slew.
What kinds of roles were you getting at that point?
Name them. I've forgotten them.
We have a few here. Father figure.
Oh, that was a wonderful picture. That was a very wonderful picture. I really loved doing that. It was quite an emotional role, and it was a terrific cast. Don't ask me names. I can't remember names. I'm awful.
No,
But it was a wonderfully done movie. Very touching movie about a father who had been estranged from his wife and children, and I think the wife dies. Was that the story? And he all of a sudden has to deal with one teenage son who was
Timothy Hutton.
Timothy Hutton, played my teenage son, and a wonderful younger actor. Can't think of his
Jeremy.
Jeremy Light. Jeremy.
Yeah, Jeremy Light.
Also, and the relationship of a distanced father who's trying to get back a relationship that's very difficult to get back, because when you've been ignoring your kids, I mean, they know you've been ignoring them. It wasn't so much ignoring them. I guess they lived in different cities, and but it was a very emotionally tugging picture. It's a very good one too. You ought to show that again. Yeah.
You were in 1995. You played a villain in The Colony.
Yeah, that was fun.
Were you seeking out a role that was a little bit different than?
No, I'm always seeking out roles that are a little different. You skipped the other woman.
I was going to bring that up.
Oh, because that was earlier. No, The Colony was fun playing a out-and-out villain, a man who just does awful things. But that's an interesting part to play. It's always an interesting part, villains, because you don't want to play villain. You want to play somebody that who does things because he thinks it's the right thing to do, even though they're terrible things. Interesting. It's always interesting to be put in that position where you have to justify things that you don't approve of. Yeah.
And talk about The Other Woman.
The Other Woman was a joy. That was Andy Mira wrote that. The concept of The Other Woman was a man loses his wife in a skiing accident, and at her funeral meets his daughter's college roommate and becomes involved with her and ends up marrying her. Certainly September, was it September, May relationship? Yeah. Ostensibly a happy one, no problem with it, except he ends up meeting an older woman, his age, as if it were, and the fact is she knows the lyrics to Moonlight Becomes You, and he becomes enamored with the other woman is the older woman. So it's, backwards. It was a delightful experience.
In 1986, you were in the series Black's Magic.
Black's Magic, what's his name, Levinson?
Yes, Richard Levinson.
Levinson and his partner.
William Link.
Lincoln Levinson wrote that. And it was intended to be, they were enamored of magic. And so they came up with this character who was a magician, but ended up more or less solving crimes or fixing situations or whatnot. And it was fascinating work, specifically on the magic stuff. I had to do magic tricks. And we had terrific people who knew, these magic creators. So it was a wild experience.
So you did your own magic?
I did my own illusions. I didn't do my own close-up magic. Close-up magic takes dexterity. You got to know what you're doing. To palm a card or to create pull out a coin, you got to be able to do it. I didn't do that, but I did the illusion stuff where you put the tiger in the cage and all of a sudden it's a beautiful girl. That one.
That's great. We have to change tape again.
Okay.